Hello, my name is Alice Schlegel, and I am a master's degree student at Prescott College. And this summer semester, I have been researching heuristic research concepts and reading a lot about them and trying to decide if I want to use heuristic research as my methodology for my upcoming thesis. So I put together a short prezi just to lead everyone through the 8 main concepts, because what I am realizing as I look at heuristic research is that if you can't embrace these 8 concepts, then this is probably not the method for you. My main 2 sources for this prezi are Clark Moustakis and David Hiles, and you will see later in the presentation the resources slide on those 2 men. So let's dive into the very first concept. The very first concept is called initial engagement and identifying, and I personally like to call it soul searching. So Moustakis and Hiles talk about it as initial engagement primarily, and they talk about initial engagement as a passionate awakening of your curiosity. So in this particular concept, you're trying to discover what your question should be. So you are doing some soul searching back into your past history and into your present life to think about what is really burning inside of you. What do you want to know more about? What do you feel would help other people? What themes do you want to see if they overlap inside of an experience? So it's becoming one with your research question and expressing really deep consideration inside of that concept. And not necessarily just choosing a superficial type question, but a question you can really dig deeply into. And then the second concept is self-dialogue, and I like to think about this concept as immersion. So Moustakis and Hiles both talk about self-dialogue as a critical beginning and openness to one's experience. So at this point, you've picked your research question. It's a research question that's very intimate to you, and you have to decide if you're willing to root yourself inside of that question. So every day as you're going through this process, you're really having a dialogue with yourself. You're immersing yourself in the idea, and you're reflecting on your being and your being inside of that experience. And then the next concept is tacit knowing. And tacit knowing was actually coined by Polanyi, and Moustakis uses Polanyi a lot in his book. And Polanyi talks about the idea that we know a lot more than we can tell. So it's ineffable and unspecified knowledge. So I like the part in Moustakis' book where he talks about how sometimes you'll see someone on the subway, or you'll be walking down the street and you'll see a face, and you know that person's face, that you met them before, maybe even a long time ago, but there's knowledge there, but you can't really describe why you know it, or how you know the person, or who the person is. So to a certain degree, it may even be unconscious, but it's impulsive. There's a moment where you're like, I know this, or I know that person. And the word impulsive is the word I chose to kind of express the idea of tacit knowing. You don't know why you know, you just know that you know. And I also like the idea of it being called instinctive knowledge or instinctive knowing. And then the next concept is called intuition, and that's the bridging of explicit and tacit knowing. So explicit knowledge is more defined knowledge, like you've read something and then you put your reading and your learning into action, where tacit knowing is just an unconscious knowing. You know that you know, but you don't know why. So I like to think about it as sensing. I also like to think about it as wholeness. So if you're bridging the idea of learned knowledge and unconscious knowledge, and you're committed to diving into whatever the topic is and learning more about it, you're creating a whole structure. You're creating a completeness And so that's why I really like this particular concept. It's intuition, it's sensing, it's having a good sense of who you are and the topic at hand. And then there's the idea of indwelling. And to dwell means to live, to root, to set up house. I like the concept of internal living, so living aside of oneself, but you really are looking for clues to the topic inside of yourself. And you're starting to dig deep for those fundamental insights into that topic, into that question. You're seeking to understand the nature and meaning. So why is this important to you, and why has it always been important to you ever since the experience occurred? And so you're permanently present, and day by day you're living the concept, you're living the topic, you're living the question. And then we have the idea of focusing. And focusing means you're going even deeper. So you think about a magnifying glass. You pull it out of a backpack and you start to move toward a sandy beach. And at first everything is grainy and broad and everything looks the same, but as you get closer and closer and closer and closer, you can make out those individual specks of sand. That's what focusing really is. It's finding central meaning, it's drawing insights from your knowledge, it's threading your thoughts together and connecting to a focused idea. So another way to look at it is, and I call it threaded meditation, but when I think of focusing, I like to think of threading a needle and then slowly watching that needle join together fabric. So the needle is making the fabric stronger. It's allowing it to come together. It's allowing it to connect. And then the very last concept is the concept of internal frame of reference. So I don't really have any unique terminology for this one. I think internal frame of reference is a really nice term for this. So Moustakis and Hiles talk about this as the experiencing person is the only person who can really validly speak to their experience. So a lot of researchers separate themselves from their research, and that is a particular style. Actually, there were many styles of that fashion, many methodologies that deal with separation. But if you're talking about the human condition and the human experience, and you're not trying to prove anything, you're just trying to overlap ideas and themes to help people in the future, heuristic research can be very valid because the researcher cannot disconnect from their research. They really choose co-researchers who have their shared experiences, and they do separate themselves from those co-researchers' stories. So you don't want to necessarily assume that your experience is exactly the same as their experience. But there is an assumption that there could be potential commonalities, there could be overlapping themes. And that's very intimate and unique and personal. And so when you have that knowledge and you have that data, you can't simply just throw it into a pie graph or a chart. You have to think of a way to express that creatively and thoughtfully and arrange it with purpose. So it could be through artistic expression or visual ethnography or music or poetry. I mean, there's so many different ways to express what's personal. And now we're to my resources, and these are the two primary resources for this Prezi, so David Hiles and Clark Moustakis. And also, I just want to point out, as I pull back out to the larger Prezi, that I actually reversed the order of this Prezi. So I started with a template for my Prezi, and originally the template went from the roots up to the leaves, and I reversed that flow because in heuristic research, I think we learned that you have to dig deep and you have to go into all these concepts one at a time and then thread them together to make a very strong root system for your research. In the same way as people, we tend not to show our roots to people. Our roots are important, but we tend to live in the fruit of our tree and in the leaves, the pretty parts, the superficial parts. And, it's only with those trusted people in our lives that we get down to the dirt and the roots. So I thought it was important to start up at the leaves and then slowly work my way down to the roots, because that really is what heuristic research is about. It's about trust and it's about knowing, but it can be very sensitive and very soul-searching and very emotional. So I wanted to make sure that in my Prezi I visually showed that idea of moving from the superficial to the deep. And I appreciate your time, and I hope this has helped you. I do recommend that if you are considering heuristic research, that you look at this presentation as kind of stepping onto a diving board. So now you've stepped onto the diving board, you want to know more, but don't dive into heuristic research lightly. It is quite a commitment. So use this as your diving board, but then dive deep into the waters and really read a lot more about it and fully decide if you can commit to the process and then move forward. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.